First, I would like to thank the organizers, Dubai Economic Council, Dubai SMEs, and SPI for the invitation and for organizing such an exciting event. I'd like to say a few words about the general framework for the work of SMEs and for the actions that will lead to Expo 2020. I think that Dubai is going to live exciting years ahead. In addition to Expo 2020, let us not forget that Dubai's economy has undergone a strong recovery. And in fact, without even Expo, Dubai's economy is expected to grow at a relatively rapid pace. What we are seeing is that the government is providing the general regulatory framework, is providing the infrastructure that will enable the enhancement of the role of SMEs. And actually, contrary to the previous decade, growth is going to be driven mainly by the private sector. And when we talk about the private sector, it is increasingly the SME sector. So gone are the days when we have only large GREs, government enterprises, that dominate the economic activity in Dubai. Let me just tell you about this general framework first, before moving on to what can the government do in order to enhance the role also of SMEs, specifically with regard to the organization of Expo 2020. I'm saying that Dubai is going through exciting years and exciting recovery. In 2013, the growth rate for the economy was almost 5%, which was indeed an achievement given the international environment, not only the immediate environment, but also the wider environment. In fact, some of the countries that are big trade and investment partners of Dubai have seen their growth slow down. So almost 5% of growth in 2013 was indeed a good achievement. We are expecting for 2014 a growth rate that is near that one, and we are also expecting an acceleration of growth between 2014 and 2020, the year of the organization of Expo 2020. Indeed, the average rate of growth for that whole period, and of course, some of it will be affected by the preparation for Expo 2020, the average rate of growth is going to exceed 5% per year up to 2020. Now, what is therefore, what is this environment that the government is helping to establish in order for SMEs to thrive and to participate actively in the economy? First, growth, as I said, and we are very optimistic about that. Secondly, we are also very keen on macroeconomic stability. We are keen on fighting inflation. We are keen on keeping government finances in balance so that the private sector will have the access to more finance in order to finance capital accumulation and improvement in technology over the next few years. So both growth and macroeconomic stability are very much equally important objectives that the government has set for itself. Now, as you know, this growth has already been driven by mainly services. If you take tourism, for instance, which is going to be very important as it is expected in the case of Milan, if you take tourism, the growth has been phenomenal, in fact. The number of tourists has been growing at over 10% per year over the last 3 or 4 years. In 2013, Dubai had something like 50 million visitors, not overnight visitors in general, and 10 million tourists, that is, overnight visitors, which ranks Dubai among about the 10 to 15 biggest countries that have attracted tourism in the world. And it is quite reasonable, in fact, to expect, regardless of the expo, because the number of tourists will come in the period of about 7 to 8 months during the organization of the expo. But irrespective of that, it is quite reasonable to expect an increase in the number of tourists at the rate of about 10%, because tourism is a booming activity throughout the world, even during periods of recessions. And let us not forget that about for 40% of the world population, the middle class is getting larger and larger. And given Dubai's excellent infrastructure, is going to be able to even increase its share of the huge flows of tourists that are going to come over the next few years. So when you hear about Dubai being able to attract 20 million tourists by the year 2020, that is quite a realistic objective, with 10% about growth between now and 2020, which has already been achieved over the last few years in an environment characterized by an international recession. It is quite reasonable in that case to achieve the 10% growth between now and 2020. This is, again, regardless of the expo. The number of visitors, the additional number of visitors, will of course be concentrated in a period of about 7 to 8 months, and that will be in 2020. So there will be an overlap. I think it's very important for you. There will be an overlap between the normal increase in the number of tourists and the number of tourists that will come mainly for the expo. So when we're talking about 20 million visitors, that means that part of them, or a large share, will be normal tourism. Now, in terms of impact on production, we are expecting an increase over the years in terms of value added, not in terms of sales, because in terms of sales it's much more important. But in terms of value added, we are expecting an increase between 25 and 30 billion dirhams in the constant prices of today. So that is quite important. I listened to the estimate for Milano. That's not very far from what is expected for Milan. That means that in terms of sales, we are talking about 90 billion dirhams. So there are going to be great opportunities for SMEs to take part in these new dynamics and to benefit from it. Just since we are talking about value added, for instance, in the case of tourism, the value added has increased by an average of 14 to 15% only over the last 2 years. So there are great opportunities there. Now, what is reasonably expected from the government to help SMEs to participate in these dynamics leading to Expo 2020? Of course, the government wants SME to develop, first to be created and to be developed on a sustainable basis. SMEs, I mean, the impact that the government is looking after is not just the impact for the 7 or 8 months of the Expo. It wants to help the firms that are involved to grow on a sustainable basis and not to be motivated by this single event. So this is extremely important as an objective for the government. The Expo 2020 will offer will be an occasion to strengthen networking and to maintain the same level of activity beyond 2020. This is very important. As you know, it doesn't make sense, for instance, to target only Expo 2020 and to decide on investment only on that basis. If you take hotels, for instance, it doesn't make sense for hotels to be built only to serve during that period. So we have to be very careful. And likewise for SMEs. SMEs, of course, I mean, they know their own business. They're not going to invest heavily only specifically for the event. And the challenge for SMEs is going to be to seize the opportunity to be integrated in the supply chain. That is, the Expo 2020 should be an opportunity for better integration of SMEs in the economy, locally and internationally. And I think it's much more, probably it's even more crucial for SMEs in Dubai than for SMEs in, let's say, in Italy. What can the government do in order to enhance the chances for SMEs to seize the opportunity that we are talking about? We think that the most crucial element is to provide them with information and to enhance transparency. And one suggestion, and I think that SMEs probably will start working on that in the near future, is to start with, let's say, with regard, for instance, to public procurements. You know that public investment in infrastructure is going to be very important. The estimates of about $8 billion between now and 2020 in developing infrastructure. Now, there are public procurements involved here, and SMEs can benefit from it by building relations with large firms, mainly in the service sector, but not only in the service sector, in also perhaps in manufacturing. And what can be done is for SMEs, Dubai SMEs, to develop a highly professional website that deals specifically with Expo, and that will gather and centralize information on the procurements that the government will be engaged in throughout that period. I think that is lacking a centralized website where all this information will be made available to the SMEs. One other action that can address also the interests of SMEs in Expo is for Dubai SMEs to help them with the kind of training that is specifically needed for Expo 2020. And I think that it has already been mentioned, the experience, Dubai can learn from the experience of Milan. What is the kind of training that will cater to the specific interests of visitors, especially during that period? And when we are talking about visitors, the organizers themselves, as well as the real visitors. It's going to be relatively difficult for both visitors and representatives of different countries to seek information, to invest in information seeking. It has to be there. And therefore, the reaction of SMEs to those interests should be immediate. And Dubai SMEs can actually help them a lot with this kind of training that will be highly responsive to the needs of SMEs. These kinds of actions, I think, will have to be, of course, worked out in collaboration with stakeholders, with representatives of SMEs, but we think that it's very urgent to work on this specific need, which is transparent information. It is going, the benefits that SMEs will derive from Dubai Expo will depend on the quality and the transparency of information that they will be getting from now until the year 2020. These are some of the thoughts, and thank you for listening.